drivers look like modern-day indentured servants stuck in an endless cycle of work that never ends or earns them enough money to move up the economic ladder. And to every Uber driver out there, the idea of higher pay doesn't sound terrible, especially when the work they do gets more dangerous every single week. But that's got local regulators in a contemplation because the more they crack down on these companies to try to make things better for drivers who are under attack when they're driving around because of our laws, we don't want criminals, less drivers end up getting the work they need to survive, and the companies lose money, which is terrible news for everyone except the criminals looking for their next target.
Krishna, how copy?
Good copy.
Krishna, what would be the charges for the 1015s? Taking a hostage, banditry, and attempted a murder of a public servant? From the last situation, the hostage situation.
Yeah, taking a
Ibrahim,
hostage,
where is the
banditry,
copy?
creation of civil arms group, open carrying and brandishing of rope.
Ibrahim, where is
Okay.
the...
It's in the cell. You can find me in the cell.
Okay, okay. I'm coming.
Bro, get in your car fast. We need to wash. We have special mission.
In this report, we have teenagers that surrounded a black Uber when the gentleman stopped to pick up a passenger and then decided now is the moment to try and steal his vehicle and his wallet. Even worse, apparently they were armed with an illegal weapon of some sort, and there were several of them. That's absolutely terrifying. And this isn't an isolated incident. Recently, there have been 5 carjackings, 6 armed robberies.
10 seconds. Radio check.
Loud and clear.
Have it tented and open carrying at the local.
Now you can watch the cars.
This isn't a new rule that idle time has to be compensated. About a year ago, the TLC let a whole bunch of new drivers enter the system.
Washing cars, please reset it.
And the sad thing is, city regulations require drivers to be compensated for the time they're waiting for a dispatch. Portland started to lock drivers out of the app during their shifts, preventing them from making money and limiting drivers when there's less demand. So the reason drivers are so upset is because the amount of money they're making has essentially been cut in half. And what's sad is they started making less money after rules were enacted to help protect them and help them make more. According to the New York Post, rideshare drivers they spoke to are now making less than $200 a day, where in the past they were making between $300 and $350 a day, which is a 50% pay cut at a time when all of the costs costs associated with doing this for a living are going up. Drivers report being incredibly depressed and disheartened, and who can blame them when the same thing that you're doing today gets you half what it did yesterday? But the ride-sharing companies, they say that this whole system of having to pay for idle time, it's not exactly fair for them either.
It's done. Sorry,
The
Jen.
way idle time is calculated. Apparently, all of the drivers are viewed by the city as just a gigantic pool of workers that are shared among multiple companies, and when those multiple companies contribute to idle time, they each have to pay their portion of it. But since Uber has more drivers than Lyft, and Uber drivers tend to be busier than Lyft drivers, the idle time of the Lyft drivers is bumping up the idle time of the drivers for Uber. That's offsetting, in Uber's opinion, the profitability of their drivers, making them pay more than they should be. Now, the goal here is to make it so rideshare drivers earn a fair living wage, no matter who it is that they're working for, and that they don't get taken advantage of by any of these big multi-million-dollar companies. But those same companies figured out that if they were to just log people out of their apps and not let them log in, the idle time number would go down, and they'd end up saving money, which essentially puts progressive makers in a no-win situation, because these companies, they don't care what the laws are, they just care that they're making as much money as possible. And if the laws change, they'll change their rules, and it's going to constantly be this game of whack-a-mole where, oh, let's make a rule here, and then the company does this. It's a disaster for everybody. But the real goal of these rules is to force these companies to treat drivers like employees, which they're not. And the problem is, the more that they get treated like employees, the worse for them it is. Yet nobody seems to realize that.
Advocates criticized Uber and the TLC for mismanagement of the platforms and overhiring drivers. We now have a crisis of oversaturation, and instead of paying the drivers for that empty time, the companies are instead punishing the drivers.
So these app companies, Uber, Lyft, they're tech companies, right? Well, what have tech companies recently been doing when they realized they overhired employees within the last year?
Alternate unit, check your left hand.
When drivers get locked out of these apps, they're essentially experiencing a micro layoff multiple times a day while they're trying to work. At the same time, critics say these companies are fighting the hand that feeds, because without a massive pool of workers ready to accept rides, they couldn't function or run their businesses. Yet at the same time, these companies say that when they started their businesses, they didn't have any types of guaranteed minimum pay for drivers, and things were working out just fine in their opinion. And there were complaints from drivers that they couldn't log into these apps and accept jobs. They had full employment back then. But on the flip side, drivers who are not waitlisted are able to benefit from all of the protections that the city has implemented, which means that things are better for them than in an economy that's just a race for the top. But since there's now a guaranteed minimum that every single driver has to make when they're working or when they're not working, and there are a limited number of drivers, the prices customers pay are higher, so customers have lost in that arrangement. But if you think the plight of app-based drivers gets better, right? Pure simple criminals that are targeting them, and now the fact that they can't even log in to make a living when they want to anymore, things are actually 2 to 3 times as bad for their counterparts who do food delivery through these very same companies. Jump into the epic battles of the massive multiplayer vehicle combat action game has just received a heap of new and interesting content. Aircraft, tanks, or ships, you don't have to cheat, because War Thunder has it all. Jump into the Indian T-90 Mishima or take to the skies in the lightning fast F-16.
Hello guys,
With a brand new bridge of
agents, Atlas.
you can control both tanks and aircraft on the same battery. Feel the adrenaline rush of furious fights thanks to the improved visual effects.
Bro, I said IA, not UC.
War Thunder provides complete immersion in the atmosphere of intense, non-stop action.
I am IA. Hello.
War Thunder has it.
Yeah, I'm saying
You're
Ben.
between well-known legendary battles or all alternate scenarios. Upgrade your vehicles to suit you.
Jay leaving. Assisting the watch.
What? They are doing Overwatch?
Yep,
Oh.
I'm leaving.
Stay with them. After that, we also do Overwatch on. Stay with them.
So to an extent, the exact
Yeah, it's
same
second
thing
location,
that's
right?
happening with Uber drivers is happening with delivery
Perfect.
riders and companies like DoorDash. They're now getting blocked
5 hour
out
copy.
of their apps. They actually have to schedule when they want to work because of the new guaranteed
like
wage
now they are
rules
moving
that
on second
they
edition.
have
This is
to
first. I
abide by.
don't
It's
know
like
why
the
they
same thing is playing out. It's only 10 times worse for these guys. Now, delivery riders are supposed to be earning a wage of around $20 an hour when they work. But because of these new rules, the fees to use food delivery services have gone through the roof. And what's shocking about that is even though data suggests that the number of deliveries have stayed about the same or even increased in some aspects, the drivers or riders, they're not making what they used to make either. And that's because since the fees are now higher, apparently customers don't have extra money left over to tip. And they can just work whenever they want to. What they have to do is reserve the days they want to work ahead of time, and then they'll have the right to log in and open up the app.
Krishna, you can manage that thing.
I'm alone. Just
Now, while the riders are working, they're making 22% more than they were before, but the number of active riders is down about 10%. On top of that, the overall cost to use these apps is about 10% higher. Menu prices are 12% higher,
Krishna,
and
use
added
FIB
fees charged
special
by these apps are 58% higher than they were before. And this has been particularly bad for many of the people in New York who can't get another job other than doing food delivery. In particular, you've got the asylum seekers. Food delivery is one of the only jobs they can get. And the great thing about it is the app on your phone speaks whatever language you speak. It can tell you how to bring things from point A to point B and earn a living. It's a great system to employ people in some capacity and help them get into the economy in some manner. But now
you
people are
can
getting
go
locked
and
out
do
because
some
they
work
can't
of
do
like
it like they
office
used
task.
to. You've got a lot of folks wondering how they'll ever start to get their feet on the ground here in New York. Not to mention this is also destroying the income prospects for people who would have done this on a part-time basis in addition to their other full-time work, which sadly reveals that once the government steps in and starts regulating an industry, it does cost jobs, even if those jobs in some people's opinions weren't worth having because they didn't pay enough or they were concerned. This is also terrible for local restaurants. They've been hit really hard by these new rules for delivery riders because over the last 4 years, the demand for delivery-based services has gone way up, and
18-second
have a lot of room
location is Mega Mall,
inside.
but
They were able to greatly expand their businesses and become much more profitable by having great menu items that people were willing to pay a little bit extra for to have brought to them. Like one local restaurant here where I live, their order volume is down by about 50% because I don't really live in a cool part of town. I live in an off the beaten path part of town where there's virtually no foot traffic. That place is suffering right now, and now workers at that restaurant are losing their jobs. And it's the same thing for all of these companies who were relying on traffic that was getting brought to them, maybe traffic that couldn't get to their business via the subway because public transit's not accessible everywhere in New York, showing that the financial toll being experienced by rideshare drivers is also happening to the businesses that rely on those customers as well. And that brings us to the real reason why we've got companies like Uber and even the Eats companies like DoorDash now basically shafting their workforce, stopping them from working. It's because these companies, they just want their service to be affordable so that more people will use it. They're trying to save costs on labor, which are now costs that can't get any lower than they are. And the problem here is that if you mandate a certain price for labor, there will be some companies that say, hey, we cannot afford that job, therefore we're not going to fill that position. We're not going to use that service. That's just the truth. And it hurts people that used to be able to work whenever they wanted to work, and now in many cases aren't making the same amount of money that they were making before, even though maybe on paper it seems like their job in the past was actually worse. But here's the question: how important are these jobs for New York City? Is it better to have people not do anything rather than working in a capacity that a certain person might or might not think is a good capacity, even if they themselves don't do that job? What do you think about that? Should we loosen up the market here so that people can work when they want, accept whatever jobs they want, or is that a bad idea? Is that going to lead to people being exploited, underemployed, and trapped in an economic cycle they can never escape from? Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. But I can't go like this. I'll give up. My level is so high. I'll get rid of all my work. That's just too cool. Yeah, good. What is a trap? I want all my progress. And now I have to level up again. The PlayStation 3 is the most efficient console of all time, back to that high. Not only was this an incredible every generation PlayStation,
Guys, wake up. Form a convoy.
this represents the story of every PlayStation 3 game. After a string of wins, PS1, PS2, and PS3, it's safe to say that Sony was able to top the world. Why not? After nearly 2 generations, Disney had an absolutely destroyed state. It bears Nintendo and handily outperformed the Xbox. Most importantly, gamers were incredibly excited for the next generation. It was revealed not the same way. Go bigger and bolder, what would turn into PlayStation. The dawn of the HD era was quickly approaching, and while it wasn't as drastic as the PS1 and PS2, it still presented a significant nod that's a lot more impressive than the generation upgrades these days. High definition TV was just starting to become popular, and Sony had a couple of features that second. The first was Blu-ray. Sony developed successors to the